Hello beautiful people. Here is my guide to the Ilyushin family of World War II ground attack aircraft ranging from the famous Il-10 Sturmovik to its successor, the Il-10. In the video I will go over every single model currently available in War Thunder, and also includes bits of history about the Il-2 for the interested. Hope you enjoy. The Sturmovik was both a single and two-seated ground attack aircraft designed as a low-level close air support aircraft, capable of destroying enemy armor and ground targets in general. The term Sturmovik itself was originally a term for all Soviet ground attack aircraft, and like the German term Stuka for a generic dive bomber, it was later associated with a single aircraft. You can say that the Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmovik was the Soviet T-34 tank of the sky. The Il-2 had many nicknames. On the Russian side it was for instance the Flying Infantryman and the Flying Tank. The latter a term Sergei Ilyushin came up with himself, and for a good reason. Now on the German side the nicknames were not so cute, and again for good reason. And they had quite a few of them. Such as the Fleischer, meaning butcher, Cement Bomber, meaning concrete bomber because of its toughness, and Fleischwolf, meaning meat grinder. The Il-2 Sturmovik is the most produced warplane of all times, with over 36,000 produced from 1941 to 1945. Now that is a staggering number, especially by today's aircraft production numbers. As mentioned, the Il-2 was designed as a low-level ground attack aircraft, and that is also reflected in how the Sturmoviks were lost. From the over 36,000 produced, roughly 11,500 were lost during World War II. 43% of the Sturmoviks were lost to anti-aircraft fire, 24% were lost to enemy fighter aircraft, 32% to unknown causes, and I suspect a large percentage of that percentage were lost due to inexperienced fighter pilots and pilot error. New tactics also needed to be developed for the Il-2s, and I'm sure a large number of pilots and aircraft paid a great price for that. And finally, the last 1% were lost on the ground at their own airfields due to enemy fire. There was also another Ilyushin-produced attack aircraft called the Il-10, the replacement of the Il-2. It was a completely different aircraft from the Il-2, but it looked very much like a smaller, compact version of it, and served in the same role as the Il-2 Sturmovik. There were roughly 6,000 Il-10s and equivalents produced from 1944 to 1956 in the Soviet Union and under license in other countries. Okay, so in War Thunder we currently have 10 Sturmoviks in the Russian tech tree, 1 in the German, 1 in the Hungarian subtree of the Italian tech tree, and 1 in the Chinese tech tree, which brings us up to a grand total of 13 Sturmoviks as of when this video was produced. Generally speaking, the War Thunder versions of the Sturmoviks can be described like this. They have good to excellent offensive armament, they have good secondary weapons, they are all heavily armored, they are generally slow, and they have mediocre maneuverability. Now there's a few exceptions when it comes to the above bullet points, and they will become obvious as we go through the different models, but it kind of works as a broad generalization. Okay, enough of that. I just increased my caffeine intake, and let's start out with the very first Il-2 Sturmovik in War Thunder. Oh, but before that, a little more history. Now the Il-2 prototype was initially made as a two-seater aircraft with a pilot and a gunner. During testing it was found out that the prototype could not meet the initial requirements made. It was then reconfigured and changed into a single-seater aircraft and into the first Sturmovik we have in War Thunder. Overall around 9,000 single-seater Il-2s were produced. Generally I'm going to review the aircraft as follows. First I'll go over some general stats, followed by a quick look at some structural limits. Afterwards there will be a pro and con section, and lastly a gameplay section with some final remarks. A tiny bit of housekeeping. I thought I should mention that this guide concentrates on the use of the Sturmoviks in mixed battles in the realistic game mode. So while for instance the structural limits still apply in arcade battles, the performance data does not. I do not cover pure air battles either. I wanted in the video to mostly focus on the use of the Sturmoviks against player-controlled tanks. Okay, before I start, I here briefly will make a remark about the stat cards, because you can't take the numbers at face value when you actually play the game. Think about the stat cards of giving you a general feel of how the aircrafts behave. Some numbers like max speed are usually close to being correct, while turn time can be widely misleading. I'll give you an example. With a battle rating 2.7 Il-2 M82, the stat card says 22.9 seconds turn time, while on the battle rating 3.3 Il-2M it says 34.8, so over 50% more. When you hover over the turn time, it tells you that is the minimum time for a full circle made horizontally, as a not dropping altitude. I did some quick tests in a custom battle where I started at around 370 km an hour at around 1000 meters, trying to do the same in both aircraft. The aircrafts both dropped a couple hundred meters in altitude, and I tried to whip them around as fast as I could. So mind you, this is not exactly empirical data, but this is just to give you an idea of what I mean with misleading stat cards. The start and stopping point was the outermost blue base marker to the right. As you can see, the difference was about 1 or 1.5 seconds, not over 50% as the stat cards will tell you. So again, take some of the data on the stat card as an overall feel of how the aircraft behaves, and even that is a stretch at times. Now I will still list the numbers to show you the set general feeling of an aircraft, also because stats as max speed and structural limits are overall fine. Okay, back to the show. In War Thunder we have two different single-seater versions of the early Il-2 Sturmoviks. The earliest is armed with two 20mm Shavak cannons and two light machine guns. The second is armed with two 23mm YVA cannons and machine guns. Besides the different armament, there are a couple interesting differences between the two models. For instance, the placement of the cannons on the first Sturmovik armed with the 20mm cannons is different from the later version. On the first version, the machine guns are placed outboard of the cannons, while on the second version in the game, with the 23mm cannons, the machine guns are placed inboard of the cannons. Furthermore, the battle rating 3.0 also used a new type of wing to make room for the larger 23mm cannons. On the first Sturmovik, there is what seems to be a hole on the inboard starboard wing, and that is the carburetor air intake. And on the second single-seater version, and on all later Il-2s, we have what was later placed over that intake, namely an external carburetor filter to filter out dust and debris, or debris, whatever you want to call it. Potato, potato. Aluminum, aluminium. The only other Il-2 the filter is also absent from is the event vehicle Il-2 M82. In-game, the flight envelope on the two single-seater Il-2s are pretty much identical. They share the same airframe and engine. The battle rating 2.3 Il-2 behaves as the battle rating 3.1 single-seater, well, and vice versa. Top speed is just over 420 km an hour at 2500 meters for the single-seaters. They both have a turn time of around 25 seconds and identical rate of climb of 8.6 meters per second. And that is clean, as in without any secondary armament. The wings of the Sturmoviks are pretty sturdy, and the limit for these two models is around 620 km an hour. They do not have combat or takeoff flaps, only landing flaps, and the limit for those flaps are 270 km an hour. Flaps, 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 flaps. The landing gear is pretty strong and can survive speeds up to 320 km an hour. Let's look at some of the pros and cons. Some of the pros: armament. I will briefly here mention that I, for these two first Sturmoviks, will go more into depth with armament, since especially the 23mm cannons will be found on most, and the light machine guns on all of the later Il-2 Sturmoviks, and I don't see the point in repeating the specifics of the armament with every single aircraft. When the armament differs, I will of course go into more detail. As mentioned earlier, the first Il-2 at battle rating 2.3 is armed with two 20mm SHAVAK Shavak cannons, I think they're pronounced, and two SHKAS 7.62mm light machine guns. Now this type of light machine gun is found on every single type of Il-2 in the game, and they all have the same amount of ammo for them, 1,500 rounds for both guns. The gun has a very high rate of fire with 1,800 rounds per minute and can use 4 different types of builds. Once you have the modification for the builds for the light machine guns unlocked, I suggest you use and stick with the tracer build. That build is full of armor-piercing incendiary and armor-piercing incendiary tracer bullets. So you get the benefit of armor penetration and a component to set shit on fire with, and we do like that. There are also builds that add an AI bullet, and that has a very tiny explosive component, but it's not worth using in my opinion. There's also a stealth build, which I see no little point in using for either the Sturmoviks. You can of course try using them to ambush an aircraft with, or use them to strafe ground targets with, and hope it will give you a couple of seconds extra reaction time from the enemy player, but I still don't think it's worth it, but ultimately it's up to you. Only 2 Il-2s are armed with the 20mm Shavak cannons. This first model and the Il-2 M82, which I will cover later. There is a total of 420 shells available for both cannons. We have access to 6 different types of builds: default, universal, ground targets, tracer, armor targets and stealth. Except for the tracer build, they mostly contain the same shells but in different order and quantity. I always use the armor targets build since it contains the most armor-piercing shells. In a rotation of 4 shells, it contains 3 armor-piercing and 1 high-explosive shell. The armor-piercing shell can penetrate 28mm at 10 meters, which is of course irrelevant, 24mm at 100 meters and 14mm at 500 meters. Now at battle rating 2.3, the armor-piercing shell can penetrate basically everything from the top and most light vehicles it can come up against within its own battle rating depending on the nation. Now at battle rating 3.0, we find the 1942 Il-2, and that model is armed with a far more powerful VYA cannons, which are found on most of the Il-2s. Since the shells are larger, only 300 shells total can be carried instead of the 420 shells of the 20mm Shavak cannon. They do not have the variety of belts the 20mm Shavak cannons have either, but it's not really needed. Here we just have 3 different belts: default, universal and armor targets. So no stealth belts or belts just full of high explosive shells. The 23mm armor-piercing shell is far more powerful than the one found on the 20mm Shavak cannon. The AP shell for the 23mm cannon can even at 10 meters penetrate 46mm of armor. At 100 meters it's 42mm, and even at 500 meters it's 29mm, so more than the 20mm Shavak cannon's AP shell could penetrate at 10 meters. So from battle rating 3.0 and up, very few vehicles are safe from this cannon. It can pen all vehicles from the top and almost all light and a good amount of medium tanks from the side. Armor protection. One of the big factors in the design of the Il-2 was the armor protection. Ilyushin wanted to make sure the aircraft was as suited as possible for its intended role as a low-altitude ground attack aircraft. The armor of the Il-2 is just not added armor on top to an already existing structure, but an integral part of the structure itself, which also helped keep down the weight of the Il-2. The armored shell was made from different thicknesses of steel armored plates, covering the front half of the aircraft, ranging from 4 to 12mm of thickness. Thick. In War Thunder, this armor is very effective against light machine gun fire, and from certain angles and distances, it is pretty much immune to such light machine gun fire. The armor is weakest below the engine with 4mm and strongest behind the pilot to protect its back with 12mm of armor. For the most part, the armor on these 2 single-seater Il-2s is the same, but there's a couple of differences. The battle rating 2.3 Il-2 is more protected from attacks from the back than the battle rating 3.0 single-seater aircraft. With the battle rating 2.3 1941 model, there is a 12mm armored plate protecting the head and shoulder of the pilot, while on the battle rating 3.0 1942 variant, the same plate has been reduced to 6mm. But on the other hand, on the battle rating 3.0 variant, there's a band of armor protecting the top of the pilot's head, while there is none present on the first Sturmovik. The pilots of the Il-2s were protected by 64mm thick glass plates as well. The thick blocks of glass was just in front and to the left and right of their faces. In any case, the armor is strong enough to make it a very difficult enemy to shoot down if you are only armed with light machine guns. It's not uncommon that players just either give up or run out of light machine gun ammo trying to bring down especially the battering 2.3 Il-2. The Sturmoviks can withstand a great deal of punishment and keep flying, and certainly more than basically any other single-engine World War II aircraft in the game. Fuel tanks. All the Sturmoviks have the fuel tanks placed behind the armor plates in the fuselage, so no fuel cells in the wings at all. This makes the incendiary element of light machine gun bullets more or less useless against the wings and increases the survivability of the Sturmoviks quite a bit. Secondary weapons. Okay, so for the secondary weapons, I'm here going to talk about every single type of bomb and rocket the Il-2s can use. Again, I will only do this once, since most of the Il-2s can use the same secondary weapons, with exceptions of course. I will later do the same for the Il-10, although that section will be much faster. Most Sturmoviks can carry 25, 50, 100 and 250 kg bombs, while a single model, the Il-8, can also carry 500 kg bombs. Only 2 Sturmoviks are currently able to carry bombs against sea targets, this very first Sturmovik and again the Il-8, but I'll come back to that one later. Besides the bombs, the Sturmoviks can also carry an array of rockets. This first Il-2 is also unique in regards to the rockets. It is the only model capable of carrying 8 rockets total. All other later Sturmoviks, including the other single-seater version at battering 3.0, can only carry 4 rockets to save weight, and in one other instance, no rockets at all. In real life, the ROS and RBS rockets were much more imprecise than portrayed in War Thunder. They needed to be fired in volleys and preferably by several Sturmoviks at the same time to have some kind of effect. Early in World War II, it also took between 4 and 5 Il-2s to knock out a light tank and 12 to 15 to knock out a medium tank as the Panzer IV with the Fab 50 and Fab 100 bombs. So again, not really like War Thunder. Although, on the other hand, a lot of you players are really bad. Besides the bombs and rockets we find in War Thunder, the real-life Il-2 counterpart could use even more secondary weapons. It could for instance carry up to 216 AZH2 bottles or ampules with incendiary KS liquid, and that proved effective against both armor and artillery. Later in the war, the Il-2s could carry very effective PTAB bombs, or PTAB, which were small cluster bombs that only weighed a few kilograms each. The PTAB was equipped with a high-explosive anti-tank, aka heat warhead. The Sturmoviks could carry over 200 of such bombs released from cassettes under the wings or the bomb base, but I'll come back to that later regarding another Il-2. All of the Sturmoviks except one, the Il-2 armed with the 37mm cannons, can use custom loadouts. The maximum loadout for the Il-2s is 625 kilograms. We can for instance pick the 8 RBS-82 SAP rockets and add 2 of the largest bombs Il-2 can use, the FAB-250 or FAB-250. This loadout is the closest you can get to the maximum allowed weight of 625 kilograms. Here we are just 600 grams short of maximum. This loadout will make you able to destroy potentially 10 or more vehicles with the secondary weapons alone. You just need to be good. If you want to get even more creative, you can for instance choose high explosive rockets under one wing and SAP rockets under the other. With the newly added visual secondary weapon selector, or do what I do, just set a key for it, you can then switch between the type of rocket you want to use. Furthermore, if you do it in this manner, all the rockets of one type will be fired first. Let's start out with the rockets. The Sturmoviks can use high explosive and SAP, meaning semi-armor piercing high explosive rockets. The Il-2s can maximum carry 8 rockets at one time, 4 under each wing. The rockets are normally fired one at a time, starting out with a rocket being fired from the left wing, then the right wing, and then back and forth. The weight of the rockets impact the flight performance of the Il-2s to a lesser and/or, greater degree. If you take a look at the impact of using 8 of the largest rockets, which are the ROS-82, we see that 8 rockets will add 54 kilograms to the total weight of the aircraft. Furthermore, max speed will decrease by over 23 km an hour because of the weight and increase in drag, and also the rate of climb and turn time will be affected. The heaviest rocket, the RBS-132, have an even greater impact. It adds over 400 kilograms to the total weight, close to 50 km an hour to the max speed, and the rate of climb and turn time will also increase even more. The rockets have different speed and weight, so the point of aim is not the same for all rockets, but we'll get back to that. I'll here briefly mention that Gaijin has a tendency to change how the rockets behave as in point of aim for the unguided rockets. It's either because of bugs, I assume, or just because they're messing with stuff. Sadly, they often do not tell us when they change the rockets, so it's up to us to find out for ourselves. So in that regard, I can only show you how they behave as of when this video was produced. Now these are all unguided World War II era rockets, and to mimic that, Gaijin has built in a certain amount of randomness where they hit. I would say out of 8 rockets, maybe 2 or 3 will go astray and not hit near where you are aiming. I'll start out with the high explosive rockets and the weakest first. The ROS-82 is a lightweight rocket with a high explosive warhead which only has 400 grams of TNT. The maximum armor penetration is also only 10 mm for the fragments. The rockets weigh only 7 kilograms, so it will barely impact the Il-2's flight performance. The point of aim in a shallow dive is basically on the second lowest horizontal guideline on the rocket reticle, and try to aim for the very tip of the guideline. The steeper you dive towards the target, the higher up you need to aim on the reticle. The downside of this particular rocket is that it is only effective against vehicles where the crew is exposed or with basically no armor. Furthermore, the low TNT content means that you have to hit pretty close to any crew member in order to knock them out. Although not completely useless, this rocket is the least useful of the rockets the Sturmoviks can carry. As you can see, the 10 mm of armor pen does basically nothing against this Panzer IV. In order to pen this tank, you would have to make a good hit from above and go through the top armor. And even against the truck, you need to hit somewhere close to the crew in order to knock them out with the overpressure effect. The ROS-132 is a heavier rocket weighing around 24 kilograms. Its high explosive warhead is now 2.5 kilograms, so it's a large step up from the ROS-82's 400 grams. The maximum armor penetration is also up and is now 30 mm. The ROS-132 is a slower moving rocket than the ROS-82. This means that you now need to aim either on or slightly below the lowest horizontal guideline on the rocket reticle in order to score a hit. Now with this rocket there's a better chance to knock out most light and some medium tanks even from the side. The rocket can pin the top of tanks easily, but as always there's randomness involved with the effect on target. This rocket can also easily knock out an open top vehicle even with a nearby miss. The last of the high explosive rockets is the ROFS-132. This rocket also happens to be my personal favorite of all the rockets that IL-2s can use. And once again the weight goes up. This rocket weighs 42 kilograms. It also has close to twice the amount of TNT content than the ROS-132 with 4.5 kilograms. The armor penetration is now 39 mm, so also here an upgrade. The point of aim is the second lowest horizontal guideline on the rocket reticle. This rocket can more reliably destroy any light tank and a good amount of medium tanks from the side and all of them from above. Even a heavy World War II tank like a Tiger is not safe from this rocket from above. Here I also briefly tried to show the distance from the truck. The overpressure is still lethal to exposed crew. We have 2 semi-armor piston high explosive rockets to choose from, and the first one is the RBS-82. The RBS-82 weighs 15 kilograms, and the warhead has about 500 grams of TNT. The armor penetration is maximum 60 mm. The point of aim for the RBS-82 is the second horizontal line from the bottom up on the rocket reticle. With 16mm of armor penetration, this little rocket can basically pin all light and medium tanks from the side and all heavy tanks from the top down. The downside for this little rocket is the low TNT content once again. The last of the rockets usable by the Il-2 is the RBS-132. This larger SAP rocket is heavier with close to 52 kilograms and its TNT content is around 1.4 kilograms. The armor pen is also a step up from the RBS-82 with now 85mm. This heavier rocket is also slower than the RBS-82 and the point of aim is around between the lowest and second lowest horizontal guidelines on the rocket reticle. With 85mm of armor pin, this rocket can pin all light and medium tanks from the top and the side, most heavy tanks from the side and all of them from the top down. All the Il-2s have access to internal bomb bays. They can store all 25 and up to 450 or 100 kilogram bombs, while the rest are being carried under the wings externally. The under-the-wing carried 50 and 100 kilogram bombs initially blocked the bomb bay doors from functioning, so those two need to be dropped in order to access the bomb bay. The smallest bomb is the 25 kilogram AO25M-1, and the Il-2 can carry up to 12 of them. This bomb has a very small TNT content of only 3.7 kilograms. The fragments can maximum penetrate 37mm. Now 37mm is enough to pin a large tank and a medium tank and heavy tank from the top. The downside is that you have to basically land the bomb on the vehicle to score a kill, and even that is sometimes not enough with this little thing. With open top vehicles or on vehicles where the crew is exposed, that is of course not a problem. And yet, with 3.7 kilograms of TNT, which is not a lot, this bomb still needs to hit somewhat close to kill a crew with overpressure damage or fragments. And as usual, whenever I drop bombs, I always tend to miss with at least the first one, so luckily with this bomb you have plenty to still work with. When you directly hit a vehicle, there's sometimes a white puff of smoke, and you can definitely hear a different sound than if you were hitting the ground. It sounds more like a soft thud. But as you can see, even a direct hit does not mean a destroyed vehicle. The second hit detonated the ammunition though. Since the Il-2 can carry 12 of the AO bombs, you can also drop them in series. If you choose 4, you still have 3 drops. But since these bombs are so damn small, even when you hit a tank with multiple of them, there's still a chance that they will just detonate on the armor without pinning. In this instance, 3 of the bombs hit with basically no effect. These tiny bombs are not useless, but it requires either good consistent aim or luck to make them worth the while. But I do like bringing them out and make it into a minigame just to try to score a kill with them. Next up is the Fab 50. This 50 kilogram bomb contains just over 26 kilograms of TNT, so more than 6 times the amount of the AO25. The fragments can maximum pin 65mm of armor, so it can basically destroy any light and medium tank and most heavy tanks. The Il-2 can maximum carry 6 of them. With this bomb you still need to either hit the vehicle or right next to it in order to destroy it. Another step up is the Fab 100. This bomb weighs just over 100 kilograms and has 36 kilograms of TNT. The fragments can now pin 69mm of armor, only 4mm more than Fab 50, but it adds more range for destroying a tank. With the Fab 50 it was 2 meters, with the Fab 100 it is now 3 meters. But that is still pretty much right next to a tank. The largest bomb the Il-2 can carry is the Fab 250. The bomb weighs just over 250 kg and has 122 kg of TNT, so almost 7 times the amount up from the Fab 100. Someone at the bomb factory has really been cramming the TNT into that bomb casing. Max armor penetration is 82 mm and the bomb is now lethal to a tank within 7 meters. With this bomb you have a much larger blast radius, making it much more forgiving if you miss the target. Furthermore, there's a good chance to not only destroy one tank but multiple tanks if they are somewhat close together. Due to its weight and size, you can only carry these under the wings and you can only carry 2 of them. The newest addition to the bombs available is this BRAB 220 armor piercing bomb. This bomb is designed to penetrate the armored deck of a ship and then detonate deep inside it. If you look at the armor penetration values, you can see that the higher the altitude the bomb is dropped from, the higher the armor pen is, since the bomb will have picked up more speed. But the only value we are going to look at is the 69 mm. But feel free to hit a ship or tank with Il-2 from 5000 meters altitude. The explosive content is only 38 kg of TNT for this bomb, since the walls and tip of the bomb has to be extra thick to withstand the penetration before detonation. Now this bomb is not useless for ground targets, but close to it. There's basically no reason to use this bomb unless you play naval or want to sink an LVT in a creative manner. One can wonder why Ilyushin decided to go with a water-cooled engine for the Il-2s instead of a sturdier air-cooled engine that would not have had to deal with the problems that comes along with water cooling, especially considering the role of the Il-2. At the time an engine had to be chosen, the water-cooled high-altitude engine AM-35, which was also used on early versions of the in-game PE-8 heavy bomber, just happened to be available, so it was fitted to the first 2-seater Il-2 prototype. That engine, however, was not strong enough for the task. The second prototype, now a single-seater, was equipped with a new AM-38 engine, which was a redesigned AM-35 engine suited for low-altitude performance. The AM-38 was accepted and fitted on basically all but one future Il-2s. Besides, Ilyushin could not wait indefinitely for a more suitable air-cooled engine. And that segues into some of the cons for the Il-2 engine. So all but one Il-2 in-game are equipped with a water-cooled AM-38 engine. The engine produced close to 1600 horsepower on takeoff, and that is not exactly stellar for such a heavy aircraft, and that can be felt in-game as well. Web is available and sadly needs to be used all the time to get just a bit more performance since everything is needed, especially with a full load of secondary weapons. The lack of engine power is also felt when you try to gain altitude. It is a slow and painful affair. Luckily, when the engine starts to overheat, which it will, it can stay in the orange zone for quite a long time. Armor. At battle rating 2.7 and up, the Il-2s will start to face a lot of enemy aircraft equipped with heavy machine guns and cannons, and that will definitely reduce the effectiveness of the armor protection. The armor is of course not just all in vain from that point on, but it will become more of a liability. Flaps. The Sturmoviks do not have access to combat and takeoff flaps, only landing flaps. When you decide to deploy them to help with turning, you will lose a lot of the energy that you so very much need in order not to drop out of the sky like a rock. So you have to be mindful when using them. It would have been great to be able to deploy a set of combat flaps that would make the loss of energy considerably less. There is one more single-seater Sturmovik that I have not mentioned yet, and that is the premium Il-2 we find in the German Tech tree at battle rating 3.0. It is identical to the Soviet single-seater 1942 model, also battle rating 3.0. Well, since it is that model, just captured by the Germans. It of course has German markings and some yellow stripes to help identify it as friendly to other German aircraft. Besides the camo, the only other difference is found within the secondary weapons loadout. The captured German Sturmovik cannot use any Soviet rockets or bombs. The bombs it can use are either 4 German 50 kg or 2 250 kg bombs, which are pretty good. It is a very good little premium aircraft to have in the German air tree, and if you fancy low-tier Germany, I suggest picking it up, especially when Gaijin has the annual sales going on. The German tech tree has very few dedicated ground attack aircraft as it is, and this Il-2 is more widely usable and easier to use than the German Henschel HS-129 aka Dock ground attack aircraft. Furthermore, this Il-2 has the premium bonuses to boot, so what's not to like? When you see players using Il-2, I often wonder why they do what they do. Here's the scenario. They spawn in, dive towards a tank, fire guns, fire rockets and drop bombs. Then immediately start to turn right over the middle of the map, bleeding off all airspeed, or go vertical trying to loop around for another attack run. Well, and then they die. So in my opinion, that is not the correct way to use the Sturmovik, or any other ground attack aircraft for that matter. So here's what I do. By the way, I'm not saying that this is the best way of doing it, I'm just saying that this is my preferred way of doing it, and it kind of works out. Well, until it doesn't. Okay, so here's what I do. I spawn in, I stay at altitude and start scanning for other aircraft, both from my own team and the enemy team. After a bit, I decide on what to do next. If there are friendly aircraft up and no enemy aircraft, I go hunting for vehicles, also in the hopes that friendly fighter aircraft could provide fighter cover. Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to stay optimistic here. If there are friendly and enemy aircraft up, I try to see if I can either get rid of said enemy aircraft or maybe assist a friendly aircraft. If there are multiple enemy aircraft up and I am the sole friendly aircraft, I have no problem just loitering and waiting for the enemy aircraft to either get destroyed, destroy themselves, which happens all the time, or maybe wait for a friendly backup to arrive. Enemy aircraft is the main threat for Il-2s, and I don't see any reason to feeding them an easy kill. So have a bit of patience and stay at altitude. Besides wanting to get rid of the enemy air threat first, I try to stay at altitude and speed at all times. And yet another reason for staying at altitude is dogfighting. Now the 3 single-seater Sturmoviks can dogfight, sorta. But help yourself, stay at altitude and definitely at speed to maximize your potential for dogfighting with it. And a quick note here, if you meet an enemy aircraft at the same altitude and you're facing him head on, definitely force a head-on attack with him. Chances are very good that you will actually come out on top with a powerful offensive armament. But eventually you will end up down and close to the ground with an enemy aircraft on your tail, and that is not a good spot for the Il-2, especially if you're in a single-seater variant. You can sometimes surprise an enemy fighter and make them overshoot with just being super slow, which is no problem for the Sturmovik. You can sometimes also surprise an enemy fighter aircraft and make them overshoot with deploying the landing flaps. Just remember that the landing flaps have a pretty large surface and you will lose a lot of energy when you use them. But it can, in that instance, be the difference between living and, well, not. Okay, so when I decide to start attacking ground targets, I try to prioritize them. Depending on the amount and placement, I usually try to get rid of the enemy anti-aircraft vehicles first, since they pose the biggest threat. Second on the list are open top vehicles, since they are easy prey. And the toughest nut to crack, the tanks, I save for last. And then again, this is under perfect conditions. If I spawn in with the Sturmovik late game, there could be a lot of enemy anti-aircraft vehicles around the spawn, so I cannot avoid that area. And of course, very late game, there's basically nothing but anti-aircraft vehicles left, well, often anyhow. The way I try to attack, if given the chance, is perpendicular to the capture points. That means from the east to the west on the map and vice versa if the layout is regular. That way I have the biggest chance of multiple attacks in one run across the map, It will furthermore also increase the chance that you have the enemy vehicles presented in profile, so your guns and rockets have a larger chance to penetrate the armor. Another benefit is there's a larger chance to get both cannons onto the target, so you do not have to worry about that much about gun convergence. After an attack run, I usually try to exit the area as low as I can, keeping up the speed and at the same time getting as many ground objects and terrain between me and potential anti-aircraft vehicles. After a bit and once in the green, I pull up, looking for enemy aircraft, and at the same time try to gain some altitude for the next attack run. That way, altitude can again be exchanged for speed and energy for more ground pounding. The single-seater Il-2s suffered severe losses due to the Luftwaffe's fighter attacks. To make matters worse, the Sturmoviks often flew without any fighter cover, making them easy prey. Some regimental field aircraft repair workshops then started to create a rudimentary rear gunner position. These modifications were basically a hole cut right behind the canopy, where they placed a gun mount salvaged from a wrecked or damaged recon biplane or bomber aircraft. For the gunner they put in a simple strap you could sit on, and that was about it. Over 1,000 Sturmoviks received such field modifications. Pilots were also vocal about the situation, and Captain E. Koval even sent a letter to Joseph Stalin himself asking for a rear gunner position to be added to the Il-2. Now what happened to that pilot I do not know, but basically sending a letter of complaint to Comrade Stalin was pretty heroic in itself for sure. Sergei Ilyushin was of course also very much aware of the situation, and he had originally designed the Il-2 with a rear gunner. The first prototype made actually had a rear gunner as mentioned earlier. In February 1942, some test modifications to single-seater Il-2s with fixed light and heavy machine gun installations were made, but they had very limited traverse and the pilot had to aim them using mirrors. Not exactly an ideal situation during combat. It was of course deep not good enough, a proper rear gunner was needed. The first prototype Il-2 had a fully enclosed and armored gunner position, but it was decided that such a configuration would interrupt production lines too much. So instead Ilyushin opted for a semi-open gunner position with a bit of armor and a 50 cal Berezin heavy machine gun. Berezin? I don't know. A bitch of a big gun. The modification passed the trials and went into production from September 1942. Now initially it was produced alongside the single-seater version, but later completely replaced it, and by the end of 1942 over 1,400 Il-2s with a rear gunner position had been produced. And that was also bye-bye for the single-seater version of the Sturmovik. In War Thunder we have 3 straight-wing 2-seater Il-2s, 2 in the regular tech tree and 1 premium event vehicle. At battle rating 2.7, the Il-2-37, a Sturmovik with 37mm cannons. Also at battle rating 2.7, the Il-2M82, a Sturmovik with an air-cooled engine. And at battle rating 3.3, the Il-2M, the first production model of the 2-seater Il-2. Now as per usual, how War Thunder balances vehicles through statistics and not real-life production time is also apparent here. At battle rating 3.3, we find the first straight-wing 2-seater production model Sturmovik, the Il-2M, first produced in 1942. What later came in real life was the battle rating 2.7 Il-2-37, which first saw action in the Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943. And also at battle rating 2.7, we had the event vehicle Il-2M82, which first flew in 1941. So that one I can't complain about. So what I decided to do here is to review them in the order of when they were produced in real life, which also was done with the first single-seater and will be done with the rest of the Sturmoviks. And I guess I should have said that earlier, but whatever. So let's just switch these around and get started. So we are starting out with the Il-2M82, which first flew in 1941. Sergei Ilyushin knew that there was a possibility of decrease in the supply of the AM-38F engine. So he decided to re-engine 2 Il-2s with the air-cooled radial Svetsov M82 engine, also known as Ash 82, named after the designer. This type of radial engine can also be found in, for instance, the LA-5 fighter and PE-8 heavy bomber in War Thunder. So the idea with the radial engine worked out, but it was again deemed too disruptive to the already established production line, with a lot of modifications needed to fit the M82 engine into the fuselage, so only a couple of these models were made. Top speed for the Il-2 M82 is just under 400 km an hour at 2,500 meters, so slower than the single-seaters. Rate of climb is also 7.1 meters a second, so also here a decrease. But turn time is 23 seconds, meaning this two-seater should turn slightly better than the single-seaters. The other data, wing limits and limits of the flaps and landing gear, are the same as the single-seaters, so 620, 270 and 320 km an hour respectively. And just like the single-seaters, you here only have landing flaps. Let's look at some of the pros and cons for the M82. Some of the pros: secondary weapons. A quick look at the secondary weapons will show that basically all other two-seater Il-2s but one can use 25, 50, 100 and 250 kg bombs, together with ROS, ROFS and RBS rockets. Engine. With the Sturmovik, the engine is not as fragile as with the other Sturmoviks, since this one is not liquid-cooled but air-cooled. Furthermore, it has more horsepower than the production two-seater Il-2's AM38F engine. The M82 does not really overheat with WEP. It stays in the orange zone and it takes a long time before it goes into the red zone at low altitudes. Rear gunner. Here we have the first Sturmovik with a rear gunner. All the two-seater Il-2s are armed with the same gun, the 12.7mm or 50 cal if you will, heavy Berezin, whatever, machine gun in two different variants, the UBT and UBK. Stat-wise in War Thunder they are identical though. This Soviet version of Freedom gun has a rate of fire of 1030 rounds per minute. Ammo-wise it has 280 rounds total, which also happens to be almost double of what all other Sturmovik's rear guns have. The Soviet 50 cal has access to 3 different kinds of belts: default, armor piercing and universal. Now the choice is really between the armor piercing and universal belt. The armor piercing belt has the most armor penetration with 34mm at 10 meters and 24mm at 500 meters, using an AP bullet with a cement core. But that bullet is just present with every 4th round. The other bullets are 2 regular AP and 1 AP with an incendiary element. The universal belt just has 2 AP bullets, both with an incendiary element, one with and one without a tracer. Here the armor penetration for both bullets are 29mm at 10 meters and 20mm at 500 meters. In my opinion, the winner is the universal belt. The 4mm extra armor pen of 1 out of 4 bullets and that only 2 out of 4 bullets have the incendiary element is not worth it for me using the AP belt. Horizontal guidances are ± 22 degrees and vertically it's -1 and +38 degrees. Now this is overall less than the production Il-2s, mainly because this rear gunner sits in a fully enclosed position that limits the movement of the gun mount. The gunner was protected with 6mm of armor plate in front of him and 4mm of armor plates to his left and right. Fuel tanks. As with the single-seater Il-2s, here the fuel tanks is protected behind the armor plating. And some of the cons: armor protection. The Il-2 M82 did not have an armored cowling, meaning the radial engine was not shrouded in armor plates as basically all other Sturmoviks. Here the armor started right after the engine and before the canopy. I guess it is because of the test status of this Sturmovik, but I'm not sure. It furthermore lacks any 12mm plate protection for the pilot from attacks from behind, which all other Il-2s have. Maybe they thought that the body of the gunner would soak up most of the bullets. On the plus side, because it is fully enclosed, the gunner won't have his hair messed up by the wind. Armament. Sadly, this otherwise good testbed Il-2 only has access to the OK but much weaker 20mm Shavak cannons, and not the far more powerful VYA 23mm cannons. Flaps. And just as the single-seaters, the M82 only has access to landing flaps. The Il-2 M82 is not a bad Sturmovik. is the best performing straight-wing Il-2 in the game, with the best turn radius and I believe slightly better acceleration compared to the other straight-winged Il-2s. The downside lays with the offensive armament. The 20mm Shavak cannons are far behind the 23mm Viva A cannons found in all but one Il-2 two-seater models. With M82 you are forced to rely more on the bombs and rockets if you reliably want to destroy enemy armor. Now the 20mm cannons can disable and destroy medium tanks, but it requires some good hits through the top armor. Fortunately, the cannons have more ammo than the 23mm cannons, so there's plenty for multiple attack runs. Besides, also just getting some critical hits, stopping enemy armor for a period of time is helpful for your team. So it's a cup half full kind of scenario. Let's talk about the rear gunner. Now the rear gunner is an added bonus to the Il-2, but of course with how Gaijin implemented the AI gunner means that you 99.9% of the time are better off manning it yourself. The worst aspect of the AI gunner is, in my opinion, the very limited engagement range. Stock, the AI gunner's firing range is 180 meters, and even with an aced gunner it is just 30 meters more, so 210 meters maxed out. Beyond that range, the gunner will just sit and enjoy the view, I guess. Now I have the unapproachable title in War Thunder, and that means I have shot down 1000 enemy aircraft with a defensive gunner. And a lot of those kills is simply just because I don't trust the basically useless AI gunner. Well, gunners actually, since they're all useless. That being said, the Russian 50 cal is a very effective weapon, and it only takes a few good hits to disable a pursuing aircraft. The downside here is the limited range of motion this fully enclosed gunner position has. The way I usually try to get around the weaker guns and be useful is using the M82 more in an anti-cast role, as in trying to stay at altitude and concentrate on enemy aircraft. You can actually outturn some of the heavier single-engine fighters you can come up against. The problem here lays in the very low energy retention the Sturmoviks have in general and the poor rate of climb. It is doable, but not without some struggle. Only when the sky is clear I use the M82 against ground targets. The price for the Il-2 M82 is currently around 25 Gaijin coins. So about 25 bucks in USD and euros. So is this worth 25 bucks for the regular player? Absolutely not. You don't need this Il-2 M82 at all in your lineups. You can just as easily stick with the 3 Sturmoviks in the regular tech tree. What you do get with the Il-2 M82 is a collector's aircraft with slightly better turn time and acceleration, but weak armament. Now I do have the Il-2 M82 and I like using it, but I also collect World War II era vehicles and basically stick to that era. If you didn't get the Sturmovik playing the event, just save your money. Next on the list is the first production Il-2 with a rear gunner, the Il-2M. Max speed is about 400 km an hour at 2500 meters. Rate of climb is the same as the single seaters with 8.6 meters per second. Turn time is about 35 seconds on the stat card, and take that number with a bucket of salt, and just as an indicator that this Sturmovik, like the other regular Il-2s, is a bit on the heavy side. Again, the wing limits are 620 km an hour, since it is basically identical wings, all the straight wings Il-2 used after the 1942 model. The factories producing the Il-2 used a mix of wooden and metal covered wings. Not that it really matters in the game, but whatever. It's all data. Take it or leave it. Yeah. Landing gear limits are again the same with 320 km an hour. In the beginning there was also some Il-2s which were modified to use skis instead of wheels, but they increased the parasitic drag of the Il-2 quite a bit, made the slow even slower, and they were abandoned after it was found out that the wheels had no issues being used on snow and ice. Here's something new. This Il-2M actually also has takeoff flaps. The takeoff flaps are a bit stronger than the landing flaps since they do not extend as much, and the limit for them is 418 km an hour. The limits of the landing flaps is the usual 270 km an hour. On to some of the pros and cons. Some of the pros: armament. Luckily, we are here back again with the good 23mm V/A cannons. Rear gunner. The rear gunner has access to the same heavy machine gun as the M82 model, but the ammo has been cut down from 280 to 150 rounds, a number that will remain constant for the rest of the Il-2s. Physically, the layout of the gunner position has also changed. The gunner does not sit in a fully enclosed position anymore. It is more open, which also brings the benefit of better firing angles for the gun mount. Instead of the plus-minus 22 degrees on the M82 model, it is horizontally now much more improved with plus-minus 35 degrees. Vertically, it has improved even more. So instead of plus 38 and minus 1 degrees, we now have plus 45 and minus 12 degrees. Look at this big box.
Yeah, boy.
This production model Il-2 rear gunner position has a much needed 12mm armor plate protecting the pilot, something that was not present on the testbed M82 model. What I don't understand is why a 12mm plate was not used to also protect the rear gunner, but here it's still only 6mm. The rear gunner also lost some of the armor protection, protecting his left and right. And historically, the loss rate for gunners were also about 50% higher than for pilots. No wonder. Secondary weapons. This Il-2M has the full range of bombs and rockets available, and enough said. Moving on. Flaps. Here I'll tip my non-existing hat to the fact that the Il-2M now also has takeoff flaps, which can even be used at the Sturmovik's top speed, and will not bleed off as much energy as using the landing flaps. Fuel tanks. As with the single-seater Il-2s, here the fuel tank sits protected behind the armor plating. And some of the cons: the need for speed. The two-seater Il-2M is even slower than the single-seaters. Yeah, enough said. Armor protection. As mentioned earlier, and this gets progressively worse, at battering 3.3 the Il-2M will face heavy machine guns and cannons a lot, and the armor does not really offer great protection against them. Now it's just not empty weight. The armor certainly does count for something, but gone are the glory days of meeting mainly light machine guns on enemy aircraft. The main advantage the Il-2M has over the previous Il-2 M82 is the armament. We again here have the 23mm V/A cannons, and they are here to stay. The advantage over the 20mm Shavak cannons is pretty big, especially if you face Germany around the Sturmovik's own battle rating of 3.3. You will have no problem destroying any tank in the German lineups, but ironically enough, you will struggle against the Soviet-built premium and event vehicles. Go figure. When, and not if, you get an enemy aircraft on your tail, you with the Il-2M have a better chance of defending yourself over the previous M82 model. The rear gunner's mount has a much larger range of motion, giving you a decent chance of shooting back, and often just a single hit is enough to make an enemy player break off an attack. Furthermore, if the poor rear gunner gets permanently put to sleep, the pilot now has a large 12mm armor plate protecting his back to stop incoming fire, and not just use the gunner's body to soak up the rounds. When trying to turn a bit tighter using flaps, this Sturmovik has an advantage over all previously reviewed Il-2s. Now there's also takeoff flaps to take advantage of. They do not extend as much as the landing flaps and thereby do not bleed off as much energy. It is of course not a Hail Mary for the Il-2, but everything helps for sure. With the good cannons now able to destroy most enemy armor, you can now play around more with the secondary weapons. As mentioned in the secondary weapons section, my favorite rocket is the RUFS-132. The rocket has the largest amount of TNT of any rockets the Il-2s can carry and decent armor penetration. I use the rocket mainly to get rid of enemy SPAGs from outside the range of the cannons. You can just send off a single rocket from its rail and quickly turn away from the incoming fire. Rinse and repeat. Around battle rating 3.3, Russia has some very strong lineups, and the Il-2 will fit in nicely. This Il-2 does not really suffer more at higher battle ratings, and you can just easily use it with higher battle ratings up until 5.0. I mean, at battle rating 3.3 the damage, so to speak, is already done with dangerous enemy SPAGs and fighter aircraft equipped with heavy machine guns and cannons. So fret not and just do your thing. It can't really get any worse for the Il-2. So again, cup half full kind of scenario. With the inaccuracies of rockets and the inability of most bombs to destroy a tank without a direct hit, the Red Air Force looked for alternative ways to destroy armor. Already in 1941, there were some single-seater Il-2s modified with HSFK 37mm cannons in underwing parts. They did see trial combat in late 1941, but because of problems with the cannons, they never saw large-scale production. In 1943, around 1,200 straight-winged Il-2 two-seaters were equipped with 37mm NS-37 cannons. The first time these cannon-equipped Il-2 saw action was in August of that year in the Battle of Kursk. The 37mm cannon was a powerful weapon, and once the tank was hit, there was around a 73% chance of knocking it out with a single hit with an armor-piercing shell. However, analysis of combat sorties discovered that only in 43% of the sorties a tank was even hit, and even worse, the ratio to shell fired to tanks hit was just 3%. Part of the problem were the cannons themselves. They had vicious recoil and needed to be re-aimed only after a few shells had been fired. Furthermore, the cannons required that the pilots receive special training to use them. The main reason the production was stopped was the introduction of the small P-TAP cluster bomb with a heat warhead. The small P-TAP bomb did not require special training, and the Sturmoviks could carry around 200 of them. They could basically just carpet bomb Axis armor in true concentration with them. And they did. Max speed for this Il-2-37 is 390 km an hour at very low 1,320 meters, which makes this Il-2 the slowest of them all. Congratulations. The rate of climb is the same as the other regular straight-wing Il-2s with 8.6 meters per second. The stat card tells us that the turn time is 40 seconds, which of course is to be taken with some salt, but this Il-2 is a heavy boy to turn for sure. The structure limits are identical to the Il-2M, with 620 km an hour for the wing, 320 for the landing gear, and 418 and 270 km an hour for the takeoff and landing flaps respectively. Let's look at some of the pros and cons for this big boy. Some of the pros: the obvious armament. The NS-37 cannons, and NS stands for Nudelman Suranov after the inventors, are heavy hitting. The cannons have a total ammo count of 112. We have 3 different builds for the cannons: default, air targets, and armor targets. We only have 2 different shells, but that is more than enough. The default build has a mix of high explosive and AP shells. The air targets build only consists of high explosive shells, and the armored targets build is purely AP shells. And for mixed battles, just forget about the air targets build. So the choice stands between the default and armored targets build. On one hand, the default builds brings the benefit of being better against all targets, while the build full of AP shells is best suited against tanks only. The high explosive shell has a pretty large TNT content with over 50 grams, but of course only 3mm of armor penetration. The armor-piercing shell can penetrate 71mm at 10 meters and 46mm at even 1000 meters. So it basically has the same armor penetration at 1 kilometer's distance than the 23mm Viva A cannons have at 10 meters, but in the game at least. The Il-2-37 also has the standard complement of 2 light machine guns. In real life, these light machine guns were mostly used as spotting weapons for the larger cannons. Rear gunner. This Il-2-37 has the same rear gunner installation as the Il-2M with the heavy machine gun. Flaps and the armor protective fuel tanks are also the same. So we can move on to the cons. Secondary weapons. This Sturmovik had, because of the cannon installations, no use for rockets, mainly since the cannons were a replacement for the rockets, so the rails were removed. The bomb base remained, but the Il-2 had a very limited bomb load capability because of the weight of the large cannons. The bomb load allowed was around 200 kilograms. In game, this means that there is only room for either two 100 kg Fab 100s or four 50 kg Fab 50s. Flight characteristics. This Il-2 is the worst maneuvering of all of the Il-2s, and you have to be extra careful when you're getting slow. Everything it does is slower and more cumbersome than basically all other Il-2s. This Il-2 is the most challenging to use in the game. The best attribute you as a player can have with Il-2 is patience, because it is needed if you want to have a good game with it. As mentioned, everything it does is slower and more cumbersome than other Il-2s, especially when you're talking about maneuvering. Once it becomes really slow, it feels as if it stands still in the air, so the trick is to avoid that situation as much as possible. I'm always saying that it is important to keep up the speed in the Sturmoviks, but this takes it to the max. It almost seems as if the Il-2 sucks energy out of itself on purpose. I always try to look ahead at the terrain and the situation in general when using this Il-2, since there's very little room for error. This is the most unforgiving of all of the Il-2s. Basically everything I have said about tactics and how to use the Sturmoviks in general needs to be used with Il-2 in order to have a good game, but it is definitely possible to do so. That being said, a healthy portion of luck is of course also needed. The NS-37 cannons are very powerful, but you have to be careful when using them. They have a high rate of fire and tend to wander over the target if you use longer bursts. Besides, with the limited ammo capacity, you have to avoid longer bursts anyhow. I suggest that the gun convergence be set to 500 or 600 meters. That way you avoid having to get too close to the ground, and it's easier to turn away from a threat. You will do fine just using the default build, which has a mix of high explosive and armor piercing shells. But personally, I prefer the one with pure AP shells. The cannons have no issues penetrating anything you will meet around its own battle rating and in up tiers. And again, the only vehicles you can have issues with are the German captured Soviet premium and event vehicles. You can improve the handling of the Il-2 a little with not bringing the additional bombs, but I suggest always bringing them. The 100 kg bombs are really good, and with a bit of skill it can help you score additional kills. Now all that being said, this is by far the Sturmovik I enjoy the most. I simply adore this thing. The vehicles I tend to enjoy the most in War Thunder are the quirky powerful ones, which again also brings me the most joy when I succeed on them. And if you fail, well, that's to be expected. Now I don't play Russia all that much, but I just noticed that this Il-2 is the aircraft I have gotten the most victories in and earned the most SL with. The Il-2 is definitely not for everyone. But with the right mindset, you can have so much fun with the Sturmovik. In 1943, Sergei Ilyushin carried out a large revision of the Il-2 to address some of its shortcomings. The pilots of the Il-2 really appreciated the addition of the rear gunner, but it also caused the center of gravity to change, making the originally benign handling of the Il-2 worse. The way it was successfully corrected was by increasing the leading edge of the wing's 5 degrees sweepback to 15 degrees. The change in degrees of sweepback restored the center of gravity and led to much improved controllability and stability. The Arrow, as this Il-2 was called, entered production in late 1943. The Arrow was first produced alongside the straight-wing model, but completely replaced it by early 1944. More than 36,000 Il-2s were produced. Over 17,000 of those were the swept-winged Arrow model. The Arrow was also the last model Il-2 ever produced. In War Thunder we have two Il-2 Type 3, also called Arrow. They are, besides some cosmetic differences, identical aircraft. One is in the regular tech tree and the other is a premium event vehicle. Max speed is 409 km/h at 1,400 meters, so slightly faster than a straight-wing two-seater Il-2s. Turn time is 48 Wait, what? Okay, so we know that we can't really trust the turn time in the stat cards, but this is just ridiculous. So according to the stat card, the turn time for the Arrow is 48 seconds. So Gaidin basically suggests that this Il-2 has the same turn time as the heavy bomber YER-2. Yeah, I think not. But I do think that Gaidin has some updating to do. Anyhow, the rate of climb is the standard 8.6 meters a second. The structural limits are identical to the straight-wing two-seaters, with a very nice addition here. The Il-2 Type 3 also has combat flaps. And those are very sturdy, with a limit of 447 km/h. Better late than never. Moving on to some of the pros and cons. Some of the pros: wings. So this Arrow has a new set of wings, and that does make a difference in game. It rolls better and is overall more agile. Armament. And we are back to the good old 23mm V/A cannons. The rest of the pros are the same as the straight-winged Il-2 two-seaters. So rear gunner, secondary weapons and flaps, which now are even better with the addition of combat flaps, and the fuel tanks being protected behind armor plates as usual. And some of the cons? Well, besides the usual stuff, there is none. This Il-2 is as good as it gets. Let's talk about the premium version for a minute. The premium Il-2 Type 3 called Avenger has something unique. The rear gunner position is even more open on this model than any other two-seater Il-2s in the game. Now historically, a number of rear gunners removed their canopy to increase the observation and to help with the overall awareness. Besides that, the only other differences between the Avenger and the regular Il-2 Type 3 is the nice camo and of course the premium bonuses. I believe this Il-2 still becomes available once a year for Golden Eagles, and it is definitely a great buy. You get the best two-seater Il-2 at rank 3 with premium bonuses. What's not to like? Well, except having to spend real money for it. The Arrow handles quite a bit better than the straight-wing Il-2. Now some of this might just be me thinking it, but I'm pretty sure it rolls better and it seems to be turning better, especially at higher speeds than the straight-wing's comrades. This also means that the Arrow is your best bet for a dogfighting Il-2 two-seater, and you should not shy away from it. Just remember to keep up the speed. Besides the better handling, there is nothing different from the production predecessors, the Il-2M. Them both being at battle rating 3.3 makes things very easy for us though. Once you have the Type 3 available, never look back. I'm actually surprised that it is not battle rating 3.7, since it is a better performing aircraft. So fellas, just keep sucking at using the Type 3 so it does not receive a bump in battle rating. A heartfelt thank you. In 1942, Ilyushin was requested to design a new attack aircraft with a bomb load of 1000 kilograms. The first design was the Il-2M M42, later renamed into the Il-8, of which there were two prototypes. Basically, the Il-8 was an upscale straight-winged Il-2, where the fuselage has been lengthened, and it had an upscale AM-38F engine, now called AM-42. The first Il-8 flew in May 1943. The Il-8 was faster than the Il-2M, it climbed better, and had much improved range. Ilyushin, however, requested to redesign the Il-8, and it was approved. The second model had a 4-bladed propeller, a more streamlined fuselage, landing gear that turned almost 90 degrees to lie flat in the wings, new armament, and a new 20mm cannon for the rear gunner instead of the heavy machine gun. This improved Il-8 was submitted to state acceptance trials, which ended in July 1945. Now generally the new Il-8 received good marks, but the Il-10, which at that point already had entered service, was even faster, and so the development of the Il-8 did not continue. The Il-8 in War Thunder was a premium vehicle reward from the 14th Battle Pass. Now this Il-8 looks to me mostly as the first Il-8 prototype with the improved bomb blow capacity of the later model Il-8 that did not go into production. It does not have the 4-bladed propeller, the new cannons, the 20mm cannons for the rear gunner, nor the landing gear that could rotate and lie flat into the wings either. But granted, if Gaijin would have made the second version into the game, it would basically have been a heavier and slower Il-10, too close to what we already have. But 100% correct, I do not think it is. I could be wrong, but whatever. Moving on. Max speed for the Il-8 is 471 km/h at 2,600 meters. Turn time says 20 seconds, but again, take that with a ton of salt because that is not correct. The rate of climb is 9.7 meters a second, so an upgrade over the Il-2. I believe the wings of the Il-8 are the same as the wings of the straight-winged Il-2. That also means that your structural limits are the same with 620 km/h for the wing, and same goes for the landing gear with 320 km/h. And yay, we also here have a full set of flaps with combat, takeoff and landing flaps. Did you hear that? Psst, 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 psst. Maybe I can make that into a sick beat someday. I just need a kick drum and some other shit. Anyhow, the limits for the flaps are 448, 419 and 270 km/h respectively. And by the way, the information about our aircraft structure limits I get from their information page in War Thunder. And here it does say that the Il-8 has combat flaps, but the combat flaps are either not present or maybe they're bugged out because they're not working. Let's look at some of the pros and cons. Some of the pros: armament. The armament is the usual with 2 V/8 23mm cannons and 2 light machine guns with a regular amount of ammo. Speed. This Il-8 is equipped with the AM42 engine, which was a high output version of the AM38F engine used in most Il-2s. The increase in horsepower was about 300. This gave the Il-8 about 60 to 70 km/h speed advantage over the previous 2-seater Il-2s. Secondary weapons. Here we have something new added, which we have not seen since the very first Il-2 1941 model. Firstly, the bomb load has increased by 400 kilograms and is now 1,025 kilograms. The Il-8 can use 50, 100, 250 and a newly added 500 kilogram regular FAB type bomb. It can also use a new BRAB 500, a 500 kilogram armor piercing bomb against sea targets. The BRAB 200, which also the very first Il-2 1941 can carry, the Il-8 can also carry. The Il-8 however cannot use the small 25 kilogram bombs and good riddance, and cannot use rockets at all. The FAB 500 has over 222 kilograms of TNT, and the fragments can maximum penetrate 90 millimeters of armor. The destruction range for vehicles is 10 meters, which is 3 meters more than the FAB 250, so it's a pretty big boom. The other new bomb is the BRAB 500. It has a TNT content of just over 100 kilograms. If you look at the armor penetration table, we can again see that the higher altitude it is being dropped from, the more armor it can penetrate because of the increase in speed. I suppose you can use it in mixed battles, but it belongs in naval battles. Rear gunner. The Il-8 has a new design close gunner position. It has the usual Berezin UBK heavy machine gun with the same amount of ammo the regular Il-2s have. Despite the gunner being enclosed, he has better horizontally guidances for the gun mount but decreased vertically compared to the other Il-2Ms. Horizontally it is plus 50 and minus 60 degrees, and vertically it is plus 38 and minus 13 degrees. The armor of the rear gunner has also improved. It is still just a 6mm plate in front of him, but the Il-2Ms did not have armor protection for the left and right side of the gunner. Now he sits in a fully armored bathtub, so to speak. There has also been added a smaller 12mm armored plate on the top front of the fuselage just in front of him. The rest of the pros are the same as for the Il-2M Type 3, so a full set of flaps and armor protected fuel tanks. Moving on to the cons. Secondary weapons. Okay, so this is more nitpicking, but I would have liked that the War Thunder version of the Il-8 had access to the rockets. But more annoyingly, it looks great on paper that the Il-8 now has a 1025 kg payload, but since 2 of any type of bombs block the bomb bay doors, there is really no interesting options for custom loadouts. But it's either the 2 500 kg bombs or the other regular bombloads from the previous Il-2s. That's also part of why I'm sad that it cannot carry any rockets. The most creative you can get is to add 1 500 kg bomb under one wing and then 3 100 kg bombs under the other. So in that regard, the larger carrying capacity is a bit of a waste. Armor protection. Besides the armor as usual is not nearly as effective as earlier anymore, the pilot of the Il-8 lacks the large full 12mm armor plate protecting his back. Instead, he only has a plate that protects his head and shoulders. Flight characteristics. Sadly, this Il-8 is back with the straight wings, which means less maneuverable than the excellent Il-2M Type 3. It is also quite heavy in turns and loses a lot of energy and speed. So what do we get with the Il-8? Well, we get an enlarged straight-wing Il-2, which is faster, has a better defensive gunner position with improved guidances, and can carry a larger bomb load with new 500 kg bombs, plus of course the premium bonuses. On the negative side, the Il-8 still loses a lot of speed and energy in turns, and probably even more so than the regular straight-wing Il-2. It can also get so fast in a dive that the controls lock up, and there's a risk to exceed the wing structural limits. And I'm pretty sure that is a first for any Sturmovik. The problem is most noticeable when you still have the 2 500 kg bombs attached. It can become quite dangerous in a dive, but also with a lighter bomb load in a steep dive it can become dicey. But the worst part is that it lacks the maneuverability of the Il-2M Type 3 arrow. In that regard it is a pretty big step backwards. The Il-8 is a strong presence at battle rank 3.7, although there is not much of a lineup for it besides a KV and a KV2. It of course has no problems in full up tiers, with its improved speed, good cannons and larger payload. You can sometimes surprise an enemy fighter, not with the maneuverability, but the speed, which can take players by surprise if they do not recognize the Il-8. But there is no fighter aircraft that is not able to outpace and outturn the Il-8. I appreciate the Il-8 in regards to the speed increase and better rate of climb, and of course the 500 kg bombs, but I will still take the Il-2 Type 3 arrow any day over this thing. The arrow is a much better handling aircraft, does not compress, and has access to rockets. Besides, the 250 kg Fab 250 is just fine. I looked at the marketplace when I wrote this and I could not find a single Il-8 up for sale. But I could be wrong. In any case, if you did not get the Il-8 through the battle pass, I think it can become difficult to obtain one now. But you're really not missing out on much. I do really appreciate that Gardine adds these kind of prototype vehicles, especially when they are interesting and not crazily overpowered, and I think the Il-8 fits in nicely in that category. The Il-10 is the true successor to the Il-2. It can also be called a Sturmovik, but it was a completely new aircraft. The Il-10 was constructed purely of metal, with a lot of lessons learned from the Il-2. The Il-10 was a smaller and more streamlined aircraft compared to the Il-2. It used the same AM42 engine as the Il-8, which never saw production. These changes made the Il-10 up to 150 km/h faster than the Il-2. Its smaller size also made it much more maneuverable, to the point of approaching that of a single-engine fighter. The first combat action of the Il-10 was in April 1945. The very last model was the Il-10M, which was a heavily modified Il-10 constructed in small numbers in the Soviet Union from 1952 to 1954. As of January 1st, 1955, there were still some 1,700 Il-10s in service. In 1956, the Il-10 was finally retired from service and replaced by the jet fighter bomber MiG-15 BIS. In War Thunder we have two different versions of the Il-10, a World War II 1945 model and a 1946 model. The difference between the two is the armament, but I'll come back to that later. There are two more Il-10s in the game besides the two Soviet ones. Italy has an Hungarian Il-10 and China has one. Those two Il-10s are the 1946 model. The first Soviet supplied Il-10s were sent to Hungary in 1949, and Hungary retired its Il-10s in 1956. China was the last user of the Il-10, with some remaining in service into the early 1970s. In War Thunder, both the Italian and Chinese Il-10s are identical to the Soviet Il-10 1946 model in every aspect but the camo, and all of the Il-10s share the battle rating of 5.0. Max speed for the first 1945 Il-10 is a whopping 551 km an hour at 2,800 meters. A little slower is the 1946 model with 528 km an hour. The difference in speed is because of the heavy armament the later model has. According to the stat card, they both have a turn time of 24 seconds, but as usual, add some salt. They also share the improved rate of climb with over 10.4 meters a second. The Il-10 is an entirely new aircraft and it has new and improved structural limits. The wings are strong with a limit of 720 km an hour. The landing gear has also become stronger with 450 km an hour. The Il-10s have takeoff and landing flaps. The limits are 469 and 320 km an hour for takeoff and landing flaps respectively. Now the information page says that they do have combat flaps, but they do not in the game. So in this instance I assume the aircraft behaves correctly and the information page is wrong, but I'm not sure. On to the pros. Engine. The Il-10 uses the same engine as the Il-8, a souped up AM38F engine from the Il-2, now called AM42. Armament. Here's the only difference between the two models and the reason for the difference in top speed. The first Il-10, the 1945 model, still uses the good familiar Viva A 23mm cannon in combination with two light machine guns. The ammo capacity is also the same as basically any other Il-2. But the 1946 model has, instead of two cannons and two light machine guns, four cannons installed. These are the NS-23 23mm cannons. The cannons have 150 shells each, so 600 total. There are four different builds to choose from: default, armored targets, air targets, and stealth. The cannon can use three different kinds of shells: a high explosive shell with tracer, an armor-piercing incendiary, and an armor-piercing incendiary tracer shell. The armored targets build has the same two shells, but in a rotation of 4. There is one high explosive and 3 AP shells. The air target build is the other way around, with 3 high explosive and 1 armor-piercing shell. And the stealth build is full of armor-piercing incendiary shells only. The armor-piercing shells can penetrate 32mm of armor at 10 meters and 22mm at 500 meters. Secondary weapons. The Il-10 can carry about the same as the Il-2 with 600 kilograms. We have 50, 100 and 250 kilogram bomb options. On the rocket side of things, we have the familiar RBS-82 and 132. New to the Sturmovik is the M8 rocket and the M13 UK. The Il-10 does not have the internal bomb base as the Il-2 did, but with how the weapon stations are laid out, you can actually make some interesting custom loadouts. We can, for instance, use a 250 kilogram bomb on an inner station, then 2 M13 UKs on the outer stations. On the other side we can try with another 250 kilogram bomb. Now that would be too heavy. A 100 kilogram bomb instead, and then 2 M13 UKs again. This is still a very effective loadout for the Il-10. Let's look at the new rockets. The Soviet M8 rocket is not the same as the American namesake. This M8 weighs 8 kilograms. It has just over 600 grams of TNT, with the same low armor penetration as the ROS-82 with only 10 millimeters. The point of aim for the M8 is the second lowest horizontal guideline on the rocket reticle. I won't even bother showing you the footage of it, because as you can see, with the 600 grams of TNT and 10 millimeters of armor pen, it is just capable of destroying open top vehicles and SPAGs. The other new rocket, the M13 UK, is more interesting. Stat-wise, it looks very much like a new revision of the good old RUFS 132 rocket. It weighs just over 42 kilograms and has a TNT content of 4.9 kilograms, so 400 grams more than the RUFS 132. Max armor penetration is 40 millimeters, so just 1 millimeter up from the RUFS 132. The point of aim is also the same as the RUFS 132, with the second lowest horizontal guideline on the rocket vertical. It's a great rocket. Go use it. Rear gunner. We are back with a fully enclosed position for the gunner. The rear gunner stations on both of the Il-10s are almost the same layout-wise. The only difference is this armored plate on the first Il-10. On the 1946 model, it has been removed to improve the gunner's visibility. But that's about it. The first Il-10 has Old Faithful, the Russian 50 cal, and the usual amount of ammunition. The guidances for the heavy machine gun is plus 55 and minus 45 degrees horizontally. On the vertical plane it is plus 50 and minus 18 degrees. Moving on to the 1946 model. This Il-10 has upgraded the heavy machine gun to a 20mm BT-20 cannon. And by the way, here we can see the armored plate I mentioned that is gone to improve the gunner's visibility. Although War Thunder hasn't modeled it as an armored plate, so I guess it doesn't matter really. Okay, the cannon can use 3 belts, default, armored targets and air targets. And there's a total of 4 different shells available for the cannon. Fragmentation incendiary tracer shell, high explosive fragmentation shells with and without a tracer, and an armor-piercing incendiary shell. Here you can either go with armored targets belt, which consists of 2 AP and 1 high explosive shell, or the air targets belt, which is basically the 3 types of high explosive shells without any armor-piercing shell. So with the air belt we are talking about maximum 4mm of armor pen. The AP shell can penetrate 28mm at 10 meters and 14mm at 500 meters. Personally, I use the armored targets belt because I want to make sure that I can penetrate an engine block. The guidances for the cannon is plus 52 and minus 45 degrees horizontally, and plus 40 and minus 11 degrees vertically. So not quite as good as the Il-10 with a heavy machine gun, but for a cannon that is still pretty good. Arm protection. The armor protection of the Il-10 has increased at the bottom from 6 to 8 mm mostly, and the engine is now protected with 8 instead of 4 mm of armor plate that the Il-2 had. The rear gunner position has also been upgraded with an 8.5 mm thick armor plate protecting the front of the gunner instead of the Il-2's 6 mm. Also here the gunner almost sits in an armored bathtub, but not quite as consistent as on the Il-8. And lastly, the fuel tanks are protected behind armor plating. Let's look at some of the cons. Armament. The new 23mm NS-23 cannons do not have the armor penetration capabilities of the VYA cannons. Furthermore, the new cannons have a pretty low muzzle velocity of not even 700 meters per second, and that makes them harder to aim with compared to the VYA cannons. Flight characteristics. Although the Il-10 is an overall improvement over the Il-2, when turning it still beats off a lot of speed and energy. Armor protection. At battle rating 5.0, the armor protection does not really have that much of a say anymore. So this is end of the line for the Sturmoviks. The Il-10 is most definitely a big improvement over the production Il-2s. The Il-10s are faster and now have a decent chance to either run or put up a fight against enemy aircraft even at its own battle rating of 5.0. Cannon-wise, I am not at all impressed with NS-23 cannons. The armor penetration is lackluster compared to the VYA-23s. They also feel somewhat more sluggish to use since they have reduced muzzle velocity. Now against air targets, the NS-23 cannons are just great, and it only takes a quick burst to rip apart any aircraft. We just have to remember to give them a little more lead than what you're used to with the laser VYA cannons. The secondary weapons do help out the NS-23s a little in regards to the tank killing business, but it is annoying that you have to rely on the bombs and rockets to more reliably destroy tanks. It is much more consistent using the V/A 23mm cannons. When you have an enemy behind you in the 1946 model, the 20mm cannon can definitely surprise people because it can make very quick work of an pursuing aircraft, and it is basically impossible to tell if you're in a 1946 model or not. With a powerful AIM-42 engine, the armor does not feel as heavy anymore as it did with the Il-2. The Il-10 still loses a ton of speed and energy in turns, but it can recover much faster compared to the Il-2. Personally, I never used the Il-10 1946 when I play Russia. I only used the first Il-10 with the V/A cannons. Sadly, Italy and China do not get the, in my opinion, best version of the Il-10, but it is still definitely a great attack aircraft. Okay, that was about it for this guide. I hope you got something useful out of it. I had a ton of fun making the guide and definitely learned quite a bit about the Sturmoviks in the process. Thanks for watching. And until next time, remember to deploy your die brakes. Have a good one.